Welcome back to the channel. Thank you guys for hanging with me for another video on this Wednesday night. And if you went out of your way to like, comment, or subscribe, that helps me and the channel out a lot. So thank you guys for doing that. All right, fishing pressure. I want to give you one of the most fulfilling times that you'll ever have on the water. I'm going to explain a couple different situations on how this happens. So if you can find a bait that works when nothing else will work, you will get more enjoyment out of fishing. You will go to more spots, catch more fish when no one else can. You can go behind people, your rotation doesn't matter so much, and you can basically show up anywhere on the lake where there's fish and catch bass. And that's huge because there's not a whole lot of times where that works. And it's a phenomenon that happens, but I'm going to throw out a couple of different scenarios on how you can do that and why that happens. So why that happens, if you think about it, let's say we've got a spot that has hundreds of fish on it. Saturday morning, the first boat gets there at 7 a.m. They catch one bass. 7:30, another boat shows up. They catch a bass. 8 o'clock, another boat shows up. They catch two bass. Well, then by 9 or 10 o'clock, the numbers are going to fall off. As we get the next day, the same thing's going to happen. Eventually, those fish are going to see basically every bait in your tackle box. And they're going to stop biting every bait except for maybe one that they haven't seen. And that's where this phenomenon happens. I can take a wacky rig versus every other bait in your tackle box combined, and the wacky rig can win. Now, if the fish are not where they're catchable by a wacky rig, this obviously isn't going to work. You know, if the fish are in the mats and you need 1.5 ounces weight to punch through the mats to catch the fish, the wacky rig's not going to be the deal. But times a year where you can still present your bait to big fish, the wacky rig is one of those baits where this could work and nothing else will work. So everybody that shows up to that spot, still going to be 10 a day or 20 a day, depending on what day it is. They're not going to catch anything. You can come in there behind them and throw a wacky rig. And it's not always going to be a wacky rig. You know, sometimes it may be a flipping bait or something like that, but it's typically a slow moving bait, because on days when they will bite a slow moving bait, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll bite a fast moving bait, but on days where they'll bite a fast moving bait, they'll still bite a slow moving bait. So if you just think it's Kentucky Lake, I'm going to show up with a crankbait and catch them and go out there and crank, that's not necessarily going to work. That's a much bigger gamble than everything else in your tackle box. That's going to get you in a lot of trouble. If you go to Gunnersville, I'm just going to throw a frog. Well, they didn't catch them frogging. They were catching them flipping. Or I'm going to go to Florida and just fish hydrilla with a lipless crankbait. Well, they caught them on a Cinco. Kentucky Lake, it wasn't a cranking deal. It was a dragging deal. So that isn't always your best bet. But when it does happen, it's magical. And you got to realize that you don't know all those other boats are going to that spot. You just showed up to that spot and caught two fish and said, I don't see anybody. We're going to come back tomorrow. This is a great spot. Well, if you would have stayed there, you would have seen 20 other boats fish through there. So when you get back the next day and you don't catch anything, you're, oh man, they were loaded here yesterday. What happened? Fishing pressure is what happened. You know, obviously for the fish, it's a house of mirrors, but it's also a house of mirrors for the fishermen a lot because of how many people are on the water, how many people are trying different baits. You know, we all know about a bunch of different baits and we all try a bunch of different baits. So these types of situations happen. And if you've ever fished a public lake and you've ever fished a private lake, you understand that private waters like a farm pond or a golf course pond, it's easy. It's like miniature golfing. You can get a hole-in-one every time. You can hit with the same club every time. Doesn't really matter. Public lake, especially when you have 200 boats, 50 to 100 of the best guys in the world there, you know, a Bass Open or a Toyota Series or something like that, that's going to turn the lake into Augusta. Small fairways, fast greens, every other hole's a dog leg. And that's typically how it goes. So your whole tackle box that worked in this farm pond, you got one or two things that are going to work on this lake. So fishing pressure, dealing with it, it's extremely tough, and you've got to always take that into account. So where you fish, when you figure out something that's going on, but it looks like it's a place where there's a bunch of boats stopping, you better go look for something somewhere else where there's not a bunch of boats. If I can find stuff in the back of a creek where I know no one else is fishing, that is a lot more valuable to me than that community hole on the lake where has a ton of fish, maybe hundreds, thousands of them there, but catching them on the day that you want to catch them, it's going to be tough to do. So fishing pressure, guys, take note of that. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.